She realized he was going to kill her when he told her to lie down and look at the sky. They were standing in a patch of veld outside Atteridgeville in 1995, far from the main road, far from the traffic and noise of Pretoria. The grass moved in the wind, and there was no one else in sight. He had promised her a job interview. He had spoken politely. He had even smiled. Now his voice had changed. It was calm, almost bored. She did not lie down. Moses Sithole had already killed before that afternoon. Women had disappeared from train stations and taxi ranks in Atteridgeville, Boxburg, and Cleveland. They were young, looking for work, trusting men who claimed to offer employment. Their bodies were later found in open fields, strangled or stabbed. Police would eventually connect the murders and name the spree the ABC killings, after the 3 locations where the victims were lured. But in 1995, for the women walking alone in Gauteng province, the pattern was only beginning to surface. Victim C was one of the women he selected. She had been searching for work when he approached her. He presented himself as someone connected to an employment agency. He spoke with authority, as if he had placed dozens of candidates before. He asked for her name, her qualifications, and told her he had a position available. The interview, he said, would be brief. He just needed to take her to the location. She followed him. They traveled by taxi and then on foot. With each step away from populated streets, the tension in her chest tightened. The houses thinned. The road turned to dirt. Still, she continued, telling herself she could turn back if something felt wrong. When they reached the isolated field, the pretense ended. He grabbed her. The attack was sudden and forceful. He overpowered her, pushing her into the grass. She fought back immediately, clawing and kicking, refusing to freeze. He struck her and attempted to restrain her. Later testimony would reveal that Sithole often strangled his victims. With her, he attempted control through violence and intimidation, expecting compliance born of shock. Instead, she resisted with everything she had. He stabbed her. The blade cut into her neck and upper body. Pain exploded through her, sharp and disorienting. Blood soaked into her clothing. He told her again to lie down and look at the sky, a phrase that sounded almost ritualistic. It was the same method he used with other victims, ordering them into a final position before killing them. She refused. She continued to struggle, even as her strength faded. At some point, whether believing she would die from her wounds or assuming she would not be able to move, he left her there in the field. He walked away. She did not die. The veld was quiet, except for the wind. She lay bleeding, fighting to stay conscious. Every movement hurt. She understood that if she remained still much longer, she would lose too much blood. She forced herself upright, pressing her hands against her wounds. Step by step, she began to walk. There was no direct path back to safety. The field stretched outward in all directions. She staggered toward what she believed was the nearest road, focusing on the idea of people, of houses, of anything that meant help. Each step felt unstable, her vision blurred, but she kept moving. Eventually, she reached an area where people saw her and realized something was terribly wrong. She was rushed for medical care. Doctors treated multiple stab wounds and the severe blood loss that had nearly killed her. The physical injuries were visible and urgent. The psychological damage would linger longer, harder to treat. Police interviewed her while she was still recovering. Her statement became critical. She described the man who had approached her, how he spoke, how he moved, how he led her into isolation. At the time, investigators were struggling to connect the mounting cases. Women were being found murdered in different areas, and the lack of witnesses made it difficult to identify a suspect. She was a witness. Her survival broke the silence that had surrounded his methods. She could describe him. She could explain how he lured victims with promises of jobs. She could recount the way he isolated them in open fields. Her testimony added weight to the growing suspicion that the killings were not random, but part of a deliberate pattern. As months passed, more bodies were discovered. The total number would eventually reach at least 38 confirmed victims between 1994 and 1995, making Moses Sithole one of the most prolific serial killers in South African history. The press coverage intensified. Communities grew fearful. Women were warned not to trust strangers offering employment. In January 1995, Sithole was arrested after a woman reported him for rape, leading police to investigate further. The case expanded rapidly. Evidence mounted. Survivors, including victim C, provided accounts that helped prosecutors construct a timeline of his crimes. The trial began in 1997 and became one of the largest and most closely watched in South Africa at the time. Survivors testified. Families of the murdered women filled the courtroom. The prosecution detailed how Sithole targeted unemployed women, exploited their economic vulnerability, and transported them to secluded locations where he assaulted and killed them. Victim C took the stand. Facing the man who had left her bleeding in the veld required a different kind of strength. She described the attack clearly, without exaggeration, explaining how he had promised work and then turned violent. She told the court about the stabbing, about refusing to lie down when ordered, about walking out of the field alone while wounded. Her testimony was part of the evidence that established his pattern and intent. In 1997, Moses Sithole was convicted of dozens of murders, rapes, and robberies. He was sentenced to 2,410 years in prison. The sentence reflected the scale of the crimes and the devastation left behind. For victim C, the sentence did not erase what happened in that field. Survival meant carrying the memory of the attack, the image of him standing over her, the sound of his voice telling her to look at the sky. It also meant knowing she had disrupted his cycle of silence. Her refusal to lie down did more than save her own life. It provided investigators with details that strengthened the case against him. The ABC killings exposed vulnerabilities in communities where unemployment was high and job promises were powerful lures. They also revealed the courage of those who lived through attempted murder and chose to speak publicly, even when doing so meant revisiting trauma. When she walked out of that field, bloodied and barely upright, she altered the trajectory of a case that might have taken longer to solve. Survival was not a single moment. It was the decision to keep moving when every instinct screamed to collapse. It was the choice to testify when silence would have been easier. It was the daily work of rebuilding after violence tried to erase her. Moses Sithole remains in prison. The fields where he left women have long since returned to ordinary landscapes, grass moving in the wind as it always did. But the memory of what happened there remains part of South Africa's criminal history. Victim C's name is rarely published. She is identified only by a letter in court records, a placeholder that protects her privacy. What endures is the fact that she fought back, that she refused to follow his final command, and that she walked out alive when so many others could not. Thank you for listening to Horrifying Survival Stories. Subscribe for more stories of those who faced the impossible and lived.